So I'm going to hand the microphone to Anirban. Anirban, what we're doing here is let each of the panelists make an introduction and tell the audience about what you do. Okay, so Anirban.
I can't see you. It's a bit confusing. Can you just raise your hand so I know where you're speaking from? Doesn't matter. I work for Bank Invest. We are a Danish asset management fund. Been in Vietnam for about 6 odd years now. And we are the only private equity arm of this larger asset management entity. Most of what Bank Invest does is invest in public listed instruments, whether it's bonds or equities. And I guess their claim to fame in some respect is emerging or frontier market listed equities. So we are a little bit different. And in terms of our investment strategy or criteria, I guess, it's very classic growth capital private equity, picking up minority stakes, and frankly, that's all that's really possible in this part of the world at this point in time. And then sort of working a lot with the portfolio companies where possible to try and streamline operations, grow the business, etc., and then eventually exit it. And exits typically happen through trade sales, although there are a few exceptions, or a few cases where we have sort of listed companies in order to exit them. So that's in a nutshell what we do. We've got about 16 companies in our portfolio, and we've just raised our third fund, and we're on the lookout for new investments. So, yeah.
Okay, so a stage where I, which is the venture capital firm, can invest. And so we basically, the two of us basically are technology related, work with the tech ecosystem, although Chris also work in a little bit in non-tech related, non-technology companies, small, and grow them to a level big enough where anybody can invest and then sell. So basically, it's in a nutshell what we have here on the panel. So I'm gonna, the progression, I'm gonna start small and focus in Vietnam, and then we'll grow to bigger and focus on Southeast Asia. All right, so I'm gonna start with Chris. Chris, tell us a little bit about why you choose Vietnam, and what is the level of the entrepreneurial ecosystem? What is the drive? What is the maturity level? What is the the technical skill of this country?
Okay, so yeah, I get asked.
And what is the angel investor network?
Okay, sure.
Is that?
First of all, my mother is Vietnamese, so the original reason I first visited was that I wanted to see where she was born and grew up. I was born in the U.S., so I didn't have much experience in Vietnam before that, but I've been here 6 years. And so what I've kind of come to realize is that Vietnam as a place to develop new entrepreneurial high-growth ventures is a good place because of the lack of kind of the Philippines or Indonesia. Vietnam has a good enough infrastructure to allow entrepreneurs to do what they need to do in order to be successful in the long term. Like other developing countries, they have very low startup costs, so 10 or 12K in seed money will buy you 6 months of runway for a core technology team. And that's enough time to build and develop a good product and do what you need to do to have a good potential for a Series A investor. So I'd say that's one reason. Another is that I do see, in terms of the level of local talent in entrepreneurs, very high potential for most entrepreneurs. You have a young population, very familiar and comfortable with technology, and actually, counter to what a lot of people think, Vietnamese, especially the top and most talented ones, have extremely good both analytic skills as well as creativity. I think this is not because of, but rather in spite of the education system here. The education system does not really encourage creativity or problem solving or analytic skills. It's more education through growth. But despite of that, in spite of that, there are very talented, both technical as well as creative people here, and they are finding jobs in very good, high-paying companies right now. Mostly those companies are in the outsourcing space, but as a tech or product-focused investor, it would be very easy to have a lead entrepreneur form a very strong team and be able to build a core product that adds value in a short amount of time. So as angel investors with experience in tech, we see Vietnam as a very high potential place for that.
So basically what you're saying is the entrepreneur drive is strong, the maturity level of the entrepreneur is good. What about funding? How do they get funding?
So
who fund them?
Well, so that's where we come in. We fund them. Is the easy answer to the question. But if we didn't exist, if the angels weren't here, most tech entrepreneurs would want to raise very early stage. At a very early stage, they are finding early stage funding, seed capital, in the area of 10 or 15K, just to support the development time. They would be getting that from friends and family. And this is part of the disadvantage as a Vietnamese entrepreneur, is that you have very difficult access to that initial seed capital. There's a very strong cultural bias against entrepreneurship here, HP, IBM, and get that high salary to give money back to the family. The family isn't in a position where they can actively support the entrepreneurial aspirations of the younger generation. And so that's kind of the value that we as angel investors, and I should also mention Savvy originated as a diaspora group, so a lot of our members are Vietnamese American, and they've come back and are doing business in here. Some of them are still based in the US but have a very strong interest in investing and developing growth. And now the US government is actually promoting these diaspora programs, partnership programs through USAID, to support these types of diaspora-connected programs to support entrepreneurship, both between the U.S. segment and as well as in Vietnam.
Okay. So there are angel investor who's willing to put money into the startup
Yes.
in Vietnam, and that community is growing.
Yes.
All right. So then that's where I came in. I run a venture capital fund, and then we invest at a stage where after the angel investor have put money in, and we have in our portfolio now 10 companies, and some of the companies are now, by the end of this year, are profitable and have at least $2 or $3 million of profit. So now I'm going to go to Esteban. You do Vietnam only, or you do Southeast Asia?
At this point in time, just Vietnam.
Just Vietnam, all right. And you don't focus on tech, per se, you do?
We don't have a bias against tech per se,
Okay.
but that's not
That's
necessarily
not your
what we're
area, all right.
And at any rate, we come in at a stage of the life cycle of the company where it wouldn't really qualify as a typical technology investment because it's not early stage.
All right, so tell the audience a little bit about your portfolio and give them an idea of which sectors are hot, which sector are growing the fastest, and which type of company have the bigger appetite for, let's say, someone from outside or from inside who come in and do a trade sale and acquire.
So I think in terms of our portfolio, it's really diverse. We've done everything from building materials to insurance, financial services, consumer, even steel. So our portfolio is very broad-based, but in terms of where we see the most potential, and this is based on actual experience with investing in these portfolio companies, is consumer. Consumer and financial services. Now, of course, you know, in any country at the stage of development that Vietnam is currently at, financial services penetration is so low that there is enormous room for growth. The problem in Vietnam is because there have been recent issues with the banking system and the stock market's been incredibly volatile, I think a lot of people have sort of, been distracted, and the message that I'm trying to communicate here is that, all these short-term issues notwithstanding, financial services is still a very attractive play for a market like Vietnam. So I think, our focus is consumption.
Give us an example of a financial service company.
Personal finance, for example, or whether it's, loans to buy cars or take mortgages. It could even be insurance. Insurance penetration in Vietnam is one of the lowest in the ASEAN region. Just basic financial services that any individual would desire once they get to a certain level of disposable income and have a certain asset base. In the case of insurance, it's very simple. Once I have that house and I have that car, etc., I need basic insurance products to cover any downside risk. So again, to summarize, our focus very much is on consumption-oriented businesses, and that's where we see the most potential. And of course, you need a long-term, medium to long-term horizon. I mean, there are a lot of short-term aberrations which tend to distract people from these long-term strategies, and I think it's important to keep that.
Long-term as in how long? 5 years? 10
Well, I'd
years?
say,
what kind of return can you expect if you stick out long-term?
Well, I mean, when I would say, 4 to 5 years is medium term. I would say perhaps, 7 or 10 years is a longer term investment horizon. But this really depends. I mean, the definition is less important than the key message. In terms of returns, I mean, I can't comment on a typical rate of return you can expect. You have 2 or 3 investments which don't perform that well, and then you have one investment where you basically hit a home run. And on an aggregate basis, therefore, you generate the kind of returns that your LPs are looking for. So there's a lot of variation or variance across your portfolio in terms of returns. But what I can say is what do people expect? What do people outside Vietnam, what kind of returns do they think warrant taking the risk to put their money in a market like Vietnam? And I would say probably anything north of 30% is what people would look at.
Do you have a typical deal size that you require?
Yeah, we started with a lower threshold, so we looked at investments, all the way even as low as $7 or $10 million. But of late, our strategies evolved, and with the third fund, our focus is definitely on larger investments. But again, it's important to be flexible and opportunistic in a market like Vietnam. So you can come in with all these, strict criteria in terms of deal size and sector, but because there isn't the kind of depth of investment opportunities unless you really dig deep, you need to be flexible in terms of these criteria. And so, while I say our minimum deal size would now be 15 to 20 million at least, if we find a great investment opportunity that's below that threshold, we would take it.
Are there enough deals in Vietnam that go 15 to 20 million? Is that enough?
Yeah, and I think that's really the issue, and that's what I'm trying to get at is, you won't find a plethora of companies out there which meet that kind of investment size. So therefore, you need to be flexible and lower that threshold wherever necessary.
Okay. So now we move from Vietnam to the broader Southeast Asia region and turn it over to Marcus. So Marcus, talk to us a little bit about which are the hot sectors and hot countries, if you will, as you see that investors are now looking. Southeast Asia has 11 or 12 countries. Which are the countries that are on the radar screen for investor at the moment? And also, which country are looking at Southeast Asia as a investment destination? Where are the, who are the LPs and the GPs?
Was more than the investment in China, and that's very important. I think I normally deal with strategic investors, so corporates who want to invest in Southeast Asia as opposed to private equity funds. and they're very interested in the ASEAN market. The thing about ASEAN is that there are so many different countries, and each one of them is at a different stage in its evolution. The Vietnam market has obviously had a few problems over the last few years, but perhaps it's coming to the trough, and eventually it will go back up again. Myanmar is extremely hot at the moment, but it doesn't have the infrastructure legally to really support investment from financial investors. Indonesia is extremely hot at the moment because it has a fantastic consumer market. It's interesting to note that there's a big move from corporates who used to use Southeast Asia as a manufacturing base because the labor costs were low. And that still happens, so I'd say probably 50% or more of investment is due to establishing manufacturing bases in Southeast Asia. But increasingly, especially in the bigger markets like Indonesia, and I think Vietnam will follow suit as well, the consumer market is very attractive, and so more and more corporates are looking not only to manufacture products here, but also to sell those products in the market, in the local market as well.
Okay, let's talk about scale a little bit. A local country in a particular Southeast Asian country build a regional business so that you can do bigger deals.
So yeah, the first part of what you said is again whether there's enough scale in Vietnam, right? I certainly think so. The problem is that, I mean, this is a country of 90 plus million people, right? And if you look at a lot of sectors within consumer, there's an enormous share of the total consumption pie that's comprised of, you know, informal channels or unbranded products. So if you look at a staple in Vietnam, like fish sauce, for instance, which is an integral part of Vietnamese cuisine, you know, a huge percentage of the fish sauce market here, actually, I don't know the exact number, but something like probably 40-50% is actually is unbranded. So there are, you know, small companies or lifestyle businesses that produce and package these products and sell them through, you know, traditional wet market channels or your corner store. And what's happening is, with increasing awareness, and there have been incidents around health and safety, which have sort of promoted further this consumer awareness. But basically, there's a growing awareness of the importance of buying something that's sealed, that's got a brand on it, that's got a quality assurance stamp on it. And whether this is optical accessories, whether this is fish sauce, or even, you know, skincare products, where the use of a lot of counterfeit skincare products has resulted in all kinds of skin problems. You know, there's a growing awareness and a preference, and consumers are willing to pay that extra premium to buy branded products. So what I'm trying to say here is that the total size or the scale of the opportunity in the consumption space here is not entirely reflected in the size of companies that produce consumer products simply because the prevalence of branded products is still very low in the total consumption pie. And so there's enormous room for growth. I don't know if I answered the question, but I can also take you know, your second question to some extent. I can shed some light. In terms of countries that don't have that scale, I certainly think Vietnam has scale. For countries that don't have that scale or critical mass, I completely agree that there are opportunities for private equity funds, for example, financial investors to come in and almost play a sort of bolt-on strategy, or, you know, use the investee or view the investee company as a strategic partner, right? Which then goes out and consolidates its presence across regions, builds a regional franchise, or even within a country. If you look at the sort of transaction structures over the last couple of years, particularly 2011 in the ASEAN region, there's been a change where the investee company in a lot of cases is not just an investee company, it's actually a strategic partner. So private equity funds come in, they provide the capital, and then these companies are a vehicle to go out there and buy other businesses which are relevant or adjacencies to their existing portfolio.
Yeah. Well, we have some good example of that, like Jollibee's is one example. Filipino companies that are coming in and buy local business and build a bigger scale. Eventually, they may be acquired by somebody else. Marcus?
Sure. I think the question I think you asked was whether if a company is successful in one particular market, can it automatically be successful around the region? I think the answer to that question is it really depends, possibly, but not necessarily. I think it's a major mistake of many corporates who think that because they have a product or a service in one particular market, they can automatically roll it out and be as successful in another particular market. The most important thing is to make sure that there is a need for your product or your service in that particular new market. And sometimes, for example, things which are popular in Singapore, where the consumers are sophisticated and quite wealthy, may not be popular in Myanmar, where obviously they're much less wealthy and they're not quite as market savvy. So you really need to make sure that there is a need for the product or the service which you give, and that the localization, whatever you, if there is a need, that you actually localize your product or your service to that particular market. There are examples of certain companies which have been successful, and I think those are basically in three different sectors. There's the food and beverage sector, which is obviously it depends on the country, but some food and beverage brands have been successful rolling out around the region. I noticed in Vietnam you don't have Starbucks, but Starbucks is popular obviously everywhere around the world, and that's not just because people like coffee, it's because in every single market it has a role to play in that market, whether it's going to be a place to meet or whether it's a place to be seen and to be cool. It really, as long as there's a need for that particular product in that market, I think would be successful. Also, I think in e-commerce, things like payment systems, things like Groupon, social discount coupons, the need for those particular products are also similar around the region. And finally, retailers, of course. There are very successful retailers who managed to, for example, Uniqlo from Japan, have fantastic presence in places like Singapore, but also in Thailand and Indonesia, becoming very popular as well.
Okay. I love to ask you guys more questions, but unfortunately we want to catch up time, and so we have 5 minutes left for, I'm going to throw the discussion of the floor for questions. So if you have any questions, please ask any of the panels. You feel free to do so now. Any questions? You have one question.
Question for Chris. I'm curious if you find technology.
We're focusing on our globally scalable, not scalable just in Vietnam. So we're looking at regional or even global plays. And we work with tech entrepreneurs who are not just from Vietnam. We bring in tech entrepreneurs from the US, from the UK, from other markets, from India even, to work with local developers, a local team, to build out globally scalable tech products. So we're not specifically focused on monetization in Vietnam for tech products. We're looking at global.
Yeah.
And I think this also fits in with...
To answer your question, our portfolio, we have 2 companies that are Vietnamese entrepreneurial, but market is global. And one is the e-commerce, so anything that Vietnam can make, we can sell it to the world, e-commerce. And the other one is in the semiconductor space, where the founder is a Vietnamese American, but they use the Vietnamese engineers to develop and write the software for the company. Question, next question. Yes.
For the venture capital and the angel investors, do the structure and terms of your deals in Southeast Asia differ significantly from what you might do in a more developed area, more developed region?
Not that much differently. Our fund is DFJ being their capital, and DFJ is from the US, as you probably, some of you may know. So we are part of the DFJ network. So the structure is a little bit more, it's really up to the, to you to fund, and basically the negotiation is with the entrepreneur. So things like dividends, if you want to apply that, your dividends at the end of every year you have dividends, or if you have first right of refusal, you have a seat on the board. Typically, venture capital terms that you apply, in the U.S., you can apply here. And I think some of the fund here go to a further step of making it more rigid, because of course the risk is higher investing in emerging countries than in mature countries. For example, liquidation right. That's one of the things that we put in our contract with the entrepreneur to make sure that we get our money first in case the company gets sold or company gets disbanded or something. And other example is we negotiate upfront a larger piece of equity, but then tie the give back to the entrepreneur through some kind of performance milestone. So anything works, anything applies.
From the angel perspective, so a lot of our members actually who are based in the U.S. Are active angels in groups in the U.S. So our experience comes largely from their perspective. We're also looking at banking off of experience from successful seed accelerators. We're looking at actually forming a seed fund with our angels, similar to Y Combinator. And actually I'm kind of at a unique position where I'm seeing a convergence of not only angels, but also impact investors, NGOs, governments, that want to put resources into entrepreneurial activities that will help economic development. As an angel investor, we don't necessarily care about that, but it allows us to leverage those resources into doing what we were already going to do. So it's kind of hedging, leveraging resources to reduce risk in investing in these very early stage companies. So we're, again, combining experience from our angels who have experience and been angels in the US for many years, as well as what we've learned from models like Y Combinator or Techstars.
Unfortunately,
Sorry.
Okay, so room for one more question. I saw the end sign from the organizer, but I'm going to blow the whistle and say one more question.
Typically develop products for global market environment. So if we keep that in mind, my question now is, if you look at the total opportunity set, the kinds of entrepreneurs that you're supporting, would you find a genuine innovation happening here on the ground where those solutions are then sold globally in competition with potentially other solutions available already, or even knockoffs or excuse my language here, but sort of copies, let's just say, of existing business models, and we're taking advantage of maybe a lower development cost? And if it is the latter, to what extent is that opportunity set sustainable?
Well, I think the opportunities that we have access to and the opportunities that we select, we really do look for the genuine innovation. And I can give a really good example. We had one of our kind of portfolio companies just this last week developed a very simple, very easy web application that allows people to determine their browser settings just by going to a URL. So you pass the URL, so a support person working at a tech company that needs to support someone who's having trouble with their browser, they just pass them this URL. It's a simple, they don't even have to click a button. They just put the copy-paste the URL into the browser. That simple app was voted to the top of Hacker News, which is a very popular blogging for tech. And that website got 40,000 hits in 24 hours. And this was developed in Vietnam by experienced entrepreneurs who do web development. So it's something that was brand new, totally innovative, and no one had thought of it. So that app is now taking off more so than their previous apps. So just an example to illustrate, we really, we are tech entrepreneurs ourselves, and we look for genuine innovation, not just Me Too or copies.
All right, so quickly, that's brings us to the end of our session. Thank you, our panelists, Aliban, Marcus, and Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'd actually like to welcome the next panel up to the stage. We've actually got David over from the
I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists. Firstly, Mr. Baron Ahmoud from Callan Capital. And then Mr. Yi Chun-sek from Baker & McKenzie. And Chandra Mohanty from Fundamental Value Partners. Just very quickly, introduction about myself. I'm one of the partners at Vietnam Investments Group. We focus on private equity investments in Vietnam, currently managing our second fund. Prior to coming back to Vietnam, I managed mergers and acquisitions and investments at Microsoft in Seattle with Chandra.
Quay cái này không
Morning.
tí nữa quay mấy cách tí nữa quay
Morning, my name is Chandrakant Mohanty. I'm based out of Hong Kong and I'm the founder of Fundamental Value Partners. We essentially focus on...
Hi, good morning. My name is Chung, partner of Baker McKenzie, heading up the corporate and M&A practice. I'm actually from Singapore, but I've been in Vietnam since 1999. And in that space, we typically assist investors coming in from straight FDI to M&A and working in a number of PE houses as well. The sectors, I also look at certain sectors, including anything from manufacturing to pharmaceuticals, IT, trade and distribution.
Not a fund, but actually we invest our own capital in opportunistic investments here in the region, based in Vietnam for now 7 years.
Great. So we're quite fortunate today to have